Thanks, Rita. Thanks, everybody, for having me. So my name is Erica Johnson, like she said.
She is the immigration...
Yeah, I don't know. Immigrant rights and racial justice.
Immigrant rights and racial justice advocate for the American Civil Liberties Union. I promised her I would say that because I couldn't get that all into my, anyway.
It's a mouthful, and what does that exactly mean? I was doing a presentation the other day, and one of the people for social workers and one of the ladies asked me, so what do you do every day? And I was like, I have no idea. So the title doesn't really necessarily describe what I do, but so anyway, I'll try to be quick. I know we're probably short on time already, and what I would like to do is start the day off with legislation. That's fun, right? So give you the details and hopefully provide you with things that you can walk out of here with to get more information about the details of specific legislation if you need it. Does that make sense? So does everybody have an agenda? That's sort of important. If not, should be a couple more floating around we can get you, and then if not that, then we'll absolutely email them out and follow up with that. I've also got a couple other things here to hand out. Might do that while I talk, but wanted to start out with federal level legislation. So comprehensive immigration reform, start big and then go small, right? That's what we'll do. And then Joy, I think, is going to follow up specifically with some good stories that, and I'll just sort of another caveat is, while the legislation, the nitty gritty of the details of bills are important to sort of know, really you don't need to be an expert in order to lobby. The stories are powerful and impactful, so we'll spend hopefully a lot of time on that. And feel free to throw out questions if you have them.
Excuse me.
Yes.
We're not hearing you.
No? Do I need to talk?
There you
okay. Thanks, that's helpful. So comprehensive immigration reform, there are some detailed principles. There's a website that I've listed on your agenda. It's a pretty simple one. It's a great place for information. The National Immigration Law Center, very thorough, because they're lawyers. Lawyers are thorough, right? So you can go there and find the whole list of principles, and there are many of them if you want to. That's perfectly fine. But for me, I think it's helpful to think of 3 or 4 of them primarily. And the first one is family unity. So what do we talk about? What do we mean when we talk about comprehensive immigration reform? The first one is family unity. So making sure we have a system that joins families together rather than breaking them apart. Pretty simple, right? The second one, oh, sorry, I skipped one. The first one should be a roadmap to citizenship. That's probably a term that people hear a lot, but what does it actually mean? It means the system that we have right now is very difficult to maneuver. It's very difficult to actually enter this country through legal pathways, and I'm sure that we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but we need to have a system that actually works for people. The third one, worker protections. Is that also pretty common sense? Having a system that protects workers. So right now there's a lot of workers that, and this sort of goes back to the intersections of immigration and human trafficking. So sometimes workers come to this country without documents, say, and they're working for an employer who takes advantage of them, doesn't feel like they need to pay them. Maybe even holds their visa if they have one, or holds their passport, or holds any sort of identification and doesn't pay them. That's involuntary servitude. That's trafficking. Those things are not things that protect workers. And so we need a system that guards against those and gives people ample opportunity to move about the country and work for employers without the threat of having their wages stolen or having their documentation withheld from them. Does that make sense? And the last one, this is a big one. I just started working for the ACLU in September of this year. I've been working on immigrant rights issues for about 8 years with lots of different organizations. But so I'm getting to learn how lawyers view things. I'm sort of trying to understand how lawyers view things. And so due process and giving people their fair day in court is a big thing in the lawyer community, and should be for all of us, especially those of us who live in Iowa. Folks remember Postville? What happened in Postville? When I was there I spent about 3 weeks in Postville living in a Motel 6, organizing with people who were affected by the raid at St. Bridget's and other folks in Postville. And during that time, people were just hurtled through these processing centers. Remember the Cattle Congress in Waterloo? So multiple people at a time would sit down in front of a judge, and the judge would sort of declare their sentences for all of them. And that didn't really seem like a system that was giving people their fair day in court. Understanding each individual's circumstances, what happened to them. There's a lot of nasty things that happened in that packing plant in Postville, and so One of the things that we think is really important is making sure that people get their fair day in court. And then also, sort of along with that, is the border militarization angle. There's a lot of money that's been thrown at the border over the last 20, 30 years. And it hasn't done a whole lot to stop the tide of undocumented immigration coming across the border. It has lined the pockets of a lot of people, and that's not something that we think is a fair, just thing or really respectful of people's civil liberties. So those are the 4 main points of comprehensive immigration reform. Again, there's a lot more. You can go to the website and read through all of those if that's helpful. Does that make sense so far? Perfect. So the next point on your agenda, if it's helpful, I'm not going to go into it, but the full text and the summary of both the Senate and the House bills are online at that website. And so the Senate and the House bills, do folks remember what happened in June? Something big happened in June. No? The Senate voted and passed their comprehensive immigration reform bill, which was a huge thing. We've been fighting for something like this for about 20 years, and it was a pretty good bill. It wasn't perfect. Legislation is very rarely perfect, right? If ever. Is it ever? But so Senate File 744 passed the Senate in June. Yay, good job. People were pretty excited about that. But then what happens? Something has to pass through the House, right? And so since June, we've been sort of working with the House members in Congress and trying to get something to shake loose in the House. So what that means is that the House currently has piecemeal. People heard that term before? So there's comprehensive on one hand, which is sort of the whole kit and caboodle, and then there's piecemeal, which is the different bits and pieces of the kit and caboodle. Yeah. So there's 5 main pieces that are being talked about in the House right now, but then there's also the House version of the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Package, similar to what passed the Senate in June. That's called HR 15. And again, there's little links that you can type into your computer, your web browser when you get home if you want to learn more about that. But 3 of the 5 that sort of stuck out to me that are being talked about in the House Judiciary Committee right now, or have been since about June. The first is the SAFE Act. It's called the SAFE Act, so-called SAFE Act. And it's kind of similar to, maybe folks heard in the news over the last couple of years what's going on in Arizona, the Show Me Your Papers law, which basically gives local law enforcement the authority to act as ICE agents and ask people that they think look undocumented to show them their papers, which is caused a lot of problems, and the Supreme Court, and I think some lower courts anyway, have definitely decided that that's a discriminatory thing, that practice of asking people who look illegal to produce papers is potentially discriminatory. And so the SAFE Act is something similar to that's being proposed in the House of Representatives in Congress. An E-Verify bill. E-Verify is an employment verification system that employers can use to make sure that their workers that they're hiring are in the country legally and authorized to work. The problem is that it's similar to many other government-run programs, is that it doesn't work very well. And it's riddled with errors, and a lot of them are based on, just typing in someone's social security number wrong, something like that. And so it's a really bad bill that is not doing anything to protect workers or employers. And then another thing is the guest worker bill, which is something that we've had in the past, and it protects a lot of agricultural workers who come up to do, seasonal labor in the United States, and then could potentially go home. But the problem with that is that it ties people to a specific employer, which, as I said before, can create problems if, for example, you're not being treated well in the job and you want to leave, or if you're retaliated against for standing up for your rights in the workplace. If you're tied to that employer, it creates a really hairy relationship for you for standing up for your rights. So, that clear as mud. Here's another good website, americasvoice.org. That's on your agenda too. It's a good place to find sort of a understandable version of what's going on in Congress with immigration reform. So feel free to check that out. You can sign up for alerts and that kind of thing. A couple other random things that are tied to immigrant rights world, and this was something that's gone out through emails if people are part of listservs on the issue. Child tax credit, which could potentially impact immigrant children and their, citizen children and their parents. And then the enforcement-only provisions. There was an appropriations bill that was just passed or approved the other day, and it had a lot of money that went to go towards the border. And again, that's not something that's ever worked in the past. It's something that people keep throwing money at trying to solve the problem by throwing money at it, and it's not really working. So that's another big thing to look out for. Again, it's passed one house, and we still have another one to go toward, I think. All right, that's federal level. That took a long time, more than 5 minutes, sorry. I knew it would. All right, so state legislative session. So if you'll flip your piece of paper over, this is what I want you to sort of be aware of as I'm talking through some of these things. So there's sort of 3 categories, and that's also on the front side of your agenda, of issues to watch for this session. So on the far left, you've got the issues that the ACLU will be watching because they deal with sort of the civil liberties theme. In the middle, there are several issues and or bills that other groups are watching, immigrant rights groups, community organizations, faith groups, etc. I think we'll talk a little bit more about those later, maybe. If not, I can answer some questions. And then the third, in the right column of those 3, it's things to watch out for. And they have negative signs by them rather than plus signs because they're usually not very good bills. So in the ACLU world, there's 2 bills that have been filed right now that we're watching pretty closely. And one has to do with spending for English language learners. Are people involved in ESL classes or English language learner classes, or do you have, any of your public schools have a lot of kids that English isn't their primary language? Heads nodding. So this is a bill that would, from what I understand, and I reached out to, because the session just started, Monday? Last Monday. So I reached out to folks from the Des Moines Public School because they've got a lot of English language learners. And the response email I got back this morning was, oh, I didn't even know that was out there. So this is something that it's important to be looking for. And I think a lot of people aren't necessarily paying attention to at this point. But basically what the bill would do is expand some of the programs and give kids more access, give teachers more resources to be able to work best with those English language learners. And,
I thought that bill had to do with providing support for persons that were limited in English in legal situations, like in courts.
That's the second one, sorry. You're probably, yeah.
Oh, I see where you are. Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, no, here.
Yeah. So we've got 2 that I'm talking about, and these are the 2 that are sort of expanded on the back side of your agenda. So the one that I was talking about is SSB, which is Senate Study Bill 3030, and this is Standards for Education of Students Who Have Limited English Proficiency. Folks see where I am? Yeah. So this bill right now is in the Education Subcommittee. The 3 legislators who are in charge of this bill are Beal, Hart, and Ernst. And you'll see I've put little footnotes there. So again, you can take this document and look to see who the people on the Education Committee are, who you need to be talking to, those kind of things. The background is that this is legislation that's been presented in the past, but it hasn't really gone out of subcommittee in the House at this point. But some talking points, if this is something that folks are interested in talking to your legislators about, are listed there. So the bill would provide much needed additional support for students with limited English proficiency. The number of students with limited English proficiency in Iowa has grown significantly over the years. Giving students and their teachers the tools they need to succeed in school will also help them become successful citizens of Iowa. This is interesting. I like cold, hard, concrete numbers, and I think legislators do. I do too. Iowa has seen a 5-fold increase in the number of enrolled English language learner students in the past 20 years. Does that seem right to you? Have you seen that in your communities? Right, and just lastly, just more of an FYI that other versions of this bill, so bills like this that have appeared in the past, and sometimes that tends to happen. Does anybody know what the term is for our General Assemblies? 1 year or 2 years? 2 years, and we're in the first year or second year of that. Second year, right. So that means that a lot of bills that have presented in the past year or so are still eligible for debate to a certain point this year. It was just a little FYI. So anyway, sorry, I was saying that previous versions of this bill have received support of a lot of different coalition groups. So faith groups, I think you guys, the Iowa Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church signed on as for the bill in the past. Education agencies, community groups, and policy organizations like the Child and Family Policy Center. Child and Family Policy Center? I'm not sure that's right, center, but. All right, moving on. So then the second bill that we're watching this session covers the cost of interpreters and translators in court. This one's kind of a big deal in especially the civil liberties due process world, the lawyer world. So what's going on right now, and I reached out to folks from the Department of Justice about specifically to get some background about what's actually going on right now. And unfortunately, I got a phone call this morning, again, from them. So I didn't get all of this written down here, but what's covered is good, and it's from a coalition from the Justice Reform, called the Justice Reform Consortium. Some people are nodding their heads. So what this bill is, and it's Senate Study Bill 3026, and basically what it relates to is providing interpreters or translators for limited English proficient individuals in legal proceedings. So this bill is in the Judiciary Committee, and the senators that are in charge of this are Senators Courtney, Dvorsky, and Whitfer. And again, similar to the English language learners bill, there's been similar legislation in the past that's been presented, but it hasn't really gone anywhere. It didn't move past subcommittee last year, but according again to the Justice Reform Consortium, the reason why it didn't move is that 2 legislators on the 3-person subcommittee said that their view was that people should just learn English. All right. Right.
Are they still on the committee?
I don't know. I could look that up. The ones from last year? It's probable. So what's going on right now, and again, I didn't hear back from the Department of Justice from Iowa until this morning. So this is just what I've taken from the Justice Reform Consortium. But what we do know is that right now, Iowa is not in compliance with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that this bill would bring us into compliance. So, and then you couple that with the fact that, the talking point from the previous bill about how there's been a five-fold increase in the number of English language learner students over the past 20 years. So that we understand the population of Iowa is pretty diverse right now, and there's a lot of different languages that are being spoken out there. So, and those people, those Iowa residents who have limited English proficiency, a lot of them, some of them are in need of court services. So what this bill does, it really goes to the heart of equal protection of the law and due process in court proceedings. It impacts everyone who has to deal with the court system, who has to go before a judge, who has to understand what that judge is saying, understand what their legal representation is saying to them, and can really profoundly affect the outcome of any court proceedings. And again, just a little background. Other versions of this bill in the past have also gotten the support of a wide, broad group of victim advocate groups like the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the judicial branch in Iowa, community organizations, faith communities, also another bill that the Iowa Methodist Conference was signed on to in the past. Whew. That's a lot of talking. So those are the 2 bills that specifically I wanted to touch base on that the Iowa ACLU will be watching. Now flipping back to the front page, the agenda part, the bills in the middle that other groups are looking out for, just kind of give you a brief overview of what they mean. So anti-wage theft. Wage theft is when you do work for somebody but you don't get paid for it. Somebody stealing your wages. Also ties in pretty heavily to, like I said, the human trafficking angle. So that's one bill. Raise the minimum wage. A lot of minimum wage workers. Oh man, I wish I could remember. I read an article yesterday about in Iowa what the yearly wage is that somebody has to live on, a family has to live on. I want to say $11,000 or $17,000 per year, which is pretty striking. I would have a hard time living on. So a bill to raise the minimum wage, a bill to, and again, these aren't, there's a couple of these that hopefully Rita and others will help us go through a little later. Some of these are actual bills that have been presented or are carrying over from last year, the beginning of the session, but some of them haven't been presented at all. One of those that hasn't been presented at all is to hire more investigators at workforce development. Sorry for the abbreviation there, try not to do that, but WFD is workforce development. That's with the Department of Labor here in Iowa. Hiring more people to look into if there's wage theft going on and who's doing that and where and why, and to make them stop. The Iowa Act, do folks know what the Iowa Act is? It's the state version of the DREAM Act, which is the federal legislation that would create a path to citizenship for young residents, people who were brought to this country when they're pretty young, but who don't have documentation. So in Iowa, it would be a little bit different because as a state, we can't provide a pathway to citizenship. That's a federal issue. But what we could do is provide what we call tuition equity. So if you're a resident in Iowa who has grown up here for a while, you would have the same access. You would pay the same rate that your classmates that you graduated with, for example.
Microphone closer to your mouth.
Thank you. I know, I'm already running over. And then just real quick, and the Iowa Act is, and we can go into that a little bit more too. It's been presented in the past. There's, I don't know. We'll see if that has any path forward this session. Driver's license card, folks may have heard a little bit about that on the radio. It's again another issue that's been brought up in the past, giving folks without a social security card something to make sure they know the rules of the road, can get insurance, and are able to drive safely. And then lastly, healthcare access for immigrant children, something that I know the Iowa Catholic Conference and the United Methodist Church of Iowa Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church has been supportive of in the past. And then in the last column, things to watch out for. Law enforcement cooperation with ICE kind of goes along with what I said earlier, similar to the Arizona bill that really erodes community trust between the police department and the community members. Employer sanctions, this is something that's come up a lot in the past, is cracking down on employers who hire undocumented immigrants. And then E-Verify, similar to what I mentioned on the housing or on the federal level, electronic employment verification. So requiring a system, a very faulty system to be put in place that employers in Iowa would use. And then housing restrictions. This is something that's been an issue out on the East Coast and also in Nebraska. There's one town in Nebraska, Fremont, who has passed an ordinance that says that landlords can't rent to people who don't have a social security number. So those are all the nasty things that we want to watch out for and fight against.
Is that why they have minuses?
Yes.
But it's not that you don't want those bills passed.
The ones over here, yeah, they haven't been presented. We're going to watch out for them. If they come up, we're going to fight them. We don't want them passed.
This may be like I totally missed the point, but help me understand how holding employers responsible or accountable for hiring undocumented people who may
Well, let's talk through it. So when the economy is good in this country, and historically over the last 100, 150 years or so, if the economy is booming, what happens? People get jobs, people are happy. Another thing that happens is that immigration usually goes up because people have jobs, people are happy. And so for a long time now, right, our country has operated on this system where the economy is good, and there's been a lot of immigration. Immigration over the last 20 years, like we talked about, has gone up. And so maybe you've heard this said before, we've had for a long time, and this is sort of changing a little bit now because we're in this recession, have been for a few years now, so we're starting to see some differences. But we have had a sign at the border that says, help wanted, and then also a sign at the border that says, keep out. So it puts employers in a tough situation, right? It puts immigrants in a really tough situation because they're looking to find work, and there are jobs, and there are people willing to pay them. So and also the federal government says, we understand that, Well, the IRS says, we understand that here, we understand that you don't have a social security number, so you're not supposed to work, but we know that you are, so here's an ITIN number. Folks know what an ITIN number is? Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. So even though the federal government, Congress says you're not allowed in this country, the IRS says you're not, but we understand that you're here, so here's a number that you can at least pay taxes while you're here. Does that make sense?
I didn't get a copy of you. You have an extra?
No, I don't.
So do I need the
I have
microphone?
this one.
All right, microphone it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't write
Thanks for
anything on it,
having
did I?
me today. I am Joy Moore. I'm an attorney at Iowa Justice for Our Neighbors. I'm one of those attorneys. Thanks for saying that so nicely. Now I'll go into that in a little bit. So I hope most of you know about Iowa Justice for Our Neighbors. If anybody is a little bit new to our organization, I'm just going to give you a little update too, because we've had a lot of change in the last few months at Iowa Justice for Our Neighbors. We've been in Iowa for about 15 years. We are a standing committee of the Iowa Annual Conference, and we operate with monthly legal clinics in 5 cities, in Storm Lake, Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Ottumwa, and Columbus Junction. And some of you, I know, already volunteer with us, and some of you may have helped at these clinics across the state, so thank you, and I hope that's been good. We are part of a national network with Justice for Our Neighbors National, operating in 14 states with various clinic sites across those states. And as I said, that's our model. We have an attorney named Bryn Howard, who's been with us about 3 years, a Drake Law grad and Des Moines native. She serves Storm Lake and Des Moines monthly. And then we just hired, she started the first of the year, Ann Naffier. Some of you may know her name. She's been in immigration circles in Iowa for maybe 20 years or so. Recently come from Davis Brown Law Firm, was previously for 12 years at AFSC. So we're just thrilled to have a really good team with a lot of experience. And then our office manager is Grisel Herrera. So we're all bilingual with Spanish and English. And Grisel is from Cuba. And so we have a great first contact answering our phone calls, who's very extremely fluent in Spanish in her first language. So, and then, as I said, I'm joy or alegría to my Spanish clients because joy is difficult in Spanish. So when I tell them joy, but you can call me alegría, they go, alegría, which just means happy, you know. So thankfully, I'm not a mean or mad person, or my name would be a curse. So my position, I started in late October with Iowa JFON, and I am working under a federal grant from the Office of Violence Against Women. And that means that I can only work on immigration cases where the applicant is a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, and either in the US or in their home country. And so I'm going to tell you in a little bit what those petitions are. My presentation doesn't have the talking points that Erica's did, which is, I'm so glad that you guys have some tools when you're lobbying today and throughout the year. But I'm going to just give you, I'm going to talk about 3 federal programs that help some of the most vulnerable immigrants in our country, and then give a couple of stories, client stories along. I've been working in direct client services for about 6 years throughout my time in law school, and so that's my perspective is client-centered. But first I thought I'd just tell you, why am I standing here in the middle of East Des Moines talking about immigrants' rights? I think we all have a story of why we're interested in either immigrants or human trafficking. And so I wish that I could tell you that my parents immigrated from Latin America, but I would be lying. I wish that I was Latina, but unfortunately I come from hardy, Western European stock. So, like many of you, probably, I'm German, Czech, and Norwegian. Mainly proud of my Norwegian roots. But sometimes I can fool people with my dark features. So I try and play both sides. So my interest in this, though, here's my disclosure. I am a Nebraskan. Whoa! Thank you for the clapping. Red till dead. I am Cornhusker strong. I'd love some water. No, I am the most diehard Husker fan you may meet, but I find myself here again. So I grew up just south of Lincoln, went to a public school that farming communities fed into, had about 500 people in my high school, but I counted this morning 5 faces that were not Caucasian, and none of those were Hispanic. And then when I was 16, we had our first migrant families come to our community and work at the dairy farm. And so our school did not have anything in place for their language acquisition. And so because I was advanced in Spanish and my father was the counselor at the school, I got set up the first day they came teaching them English every day and kind of threw together an English language learners program. So every day I worked with about 3 to 4 little elementary kids from Mexico, and that changed my thinking, that changed my career path. I was going to be a sports broadcaster on the football field, which I still want to do, and everybody tells you not to give up on your dreams, so that's my midlife career. So, however, my heart just softened for the immigrant community. I wanted to become more of a puente, more of a bridge in between the host community and the immigrant community. And so I studied Spanish at the University of Nebraska. And then I married a wonderful man in 2007, Tyler, who knew from early on that he wanted to be in law school and work on tough issues. And so he went to law school and in the East Coast, and as I was, and we're married, and as I'm watching him go through the first year of law school, I'm thinking, this looks easy. I mean, one of my highest pleasures in life is reading, and all these people do is read. So I was like, okay, I can do this. And I was working as an interpreter at an elementary school that was 40% Hispanic, and I was the liaison between the school and the parents. And so I just said, I saw so many of these immigration issues. Almost all the parents were undocumented, and almost all their kids were citizens, and I really wanted to do something to, hopefully create some justice and create some continuity and coherence in that family so that they could stay together. So anyways, I started law school in the fall of 2009 at Georgetown. Georgetown had an excellent immigration program, so I got to focus on that. And then, as some of you may know, the legal market got hit very badly, so my husband was unemployed for a year and a half, and the first place that hired him was Des Moines. So we were economically pushed out of DC, economically pushed out of Nebraska, and in the fields of opportunities, here we are. So that's me. That's why I'm here. I'm just going to briefly touch on these federal programs that I work with, and then I'll give you a couple quick stories. So, and just so you know, I'm going to put in the back, there's a great, you may have seen, I don't know what those things are called, cardboard trifold displays. There's a great one with immigration issues there, and I'm going to put our Iowa JFON brochures there. And then also, USCIS, Citizenship Immigration Services, put out this brochure called Immigration Options for Victims of Crime. And in this brochure, it outlines the main requirements for the programs I'm going to talk about. So don't write anything, right now don't write anything down. Just take this with you when you go. So in 2000, Congress passed a lot of legislation to protect women, abused immigrants was a huge piece of that. And so the first program is called Violence Against Women Act, known as VAWA. And what it is an abused immigrant who is married to a U.S. citizen spouse or a legal permanent resident spouse can bypass that U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, and apply for their own green card without needing their spouse to work with them on that process. And so, as you're probably kind of thinking, or maybe you're aware of already, that U.S. citizen could have applied for them, should have applied for their spouse, but haven't, and often don't because they want to keep them under their power and control. And so often I get referrals from domestic violence advocates or I get direct calls from the victims themselves that say, I'm married to a U.S. citizen, but for 10 years he hasn't done anything with my papers and he keeps saying he will. So we just have to show that they are abused or that they're subjected to extreme cruelty. And then after a year and a half, then they can potentially get an approval from the government. All these programs, except the trafficking visa, are very, unfortunately, backlogged and long wait times. So something we'd love to see would be more people working on these applications. So anyways, that's VAWA. An abused spouse of a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, can apply for their own green card. If every duck is in the row. Next, there's something called the U visa. Has anybody heard of the U visa? That has some yes. So the U visa is a tool for law enforcement, so that immigrants who are here without documentation will not be afraid to report crimes in their community, crimes against them, crimes against their neighbor. And so the U visa is a program where a qualifying immigrant can receive a work permit and basically authorization to be here for 4 years, and then after 3 years they can apply for their legal permanent residency. So it is a pathway to citizenship without having to have a family member apply for you or an employer. And so the biggest problem, and maybe you'll see this in some of your communities, is that in order to apply for this, you need the chief of police, you need a county attorney, you need a judge, you need somebody with investigative powers to sign a form that says that you were helpful in the investigation of a crime, that you were the victim of the crime, and that you have not unreasonably, that you have complied with every request of theirs to provide information regarding the crime. So the bummer is that there's nothing in the law that requires any of these police officers, any of these county attorneys to sign. They're under no legal duress, they're under no legal requirement. So if you're an anti-immigrant police officer, you just say, I don't believe in this program, I don't think they deserve it, end of story. And so you see across the United States, across the thousands of jurisdictions we have of many little police departments, you see some that are signing these like hotcakes and some that will never sign them. So just kind of be aware of that program. And if you hear about, I don't know what you can do on your local level, but I think advocacy, meeting with sometimes chiefs of police to educate them, I've worked on that before. So just let me know, I guess, if you have any stories from your communities in that way. So, and again, this is going to tell you a lot more about it. And I just want to touch on real quick, one of my clients, see the time? Okay. I promise I'll wrap up in 5. So one of my clients, she's about my age, late 20s. Oh, lost me. Anybody? Is it because I'm a Nebraskan? Come on, guys. I'm not a technological person, so if you want to. Do you want me to come down? Okay. Because I'm on here, right, Art? Well, like I'm on for the video. Okay. So I'll just tell you the story of one of my clients who actually can apply for both of those programs, the VAWA and the U visa. The VAWA is better for her because the VAWA is a quicker pathway to residency. So that's what we're doing. Anyways, she came across my radar from a referral up in Northwest Iowa with a domestic violence advocate. She, about my age, 3 children, came when she was very little to the United States. So she is probably better English than me. Every time we've talked, flawless, no accent. I mean, she is completely integrated in her community and not at all in her home country. Anyways, she got married 7.5 years ago, to a man that she loved, and a few years into her marriage, she started drinking more. He started, he started becoming verbally abusive. He started going out with other women, cheating on her. So their marriage, began to break down. And in this fall, I would also say he became enamored with guns. So that's never good with that combination. So this fall, he had been actively with another woman and then came over to my client's home when her children were home. He became very agitated, came intoxicated, started arguing with her, and as she was telling him to leave and trying to get away, he physically assaulted her and sprained her wrist pretty bad and threatened her with death, and she knew he had a gun, and so he could deliver. Thankfully, he left. She called the police. She gave a report. She gave all this information. A warrant is out for his arrest. And so the police in this community signed a certification that she was helpful, so she could apply for the U visa. But because her husband is a U.S. citizen and he could have applied for her in 2006 when they got married, she can also use the VAWA program to just bypass him and apply as the abused spouse of a U.S. citizen. So she is a wonderful person, a high school graduate, beauty school graduate. She works nights at a factory. She comes home, she gets off her shift, she gets her girls ready for school. They go to school, she sleeps, she picks them up, she does homework with them, gets them ready for bed, and then goes off and works again. And so just an example of someone I'm deeply impressed with her sacrifice, with what she's willing to do to put food on the table. And I'm very thankful that we have these programs in place where we can help somebody like this. The one thing I would mention, I told you about the wait times. It's often 1.5 years before anything, before they hear back on their application, which is just too long if you don't have a work permit, if you're waiting for your work permit and you can't work here legally. So that's one point. And then for the U visa, they only give $10,000 a year to victims of crime. And it's not just victims of domestic violence. It's victims of felonious assault or kidnapping, or also they list 17 different crimes that if they happen to you, you could apply for this. So anyways, they only give $10,000 a year, and this fiscal year they ran out of the $10,000 2 months into the fiscal year. So now that means people are going to be waiting 2 years, 3 years, and it's just going to balloon and balloon and balloon. And so advocates in DC, it's because it's statutory, they're going to have to pass something to change that. And so I'm just concerned for the future of that program until the number goes up with visas issued. Takes me to my last quick thing, and that's the trafficking visa, which we're going to hear about trafficking next. But the trafficking visa is very similar to the U visa, where it gives the same work permit for 4 years with the pathway to residency after 3 for victims of either labor or sex trafficking who have assisted law enforcement in the investigation of the trafficker. So Unlike the U visa, though, this is more protective of victims, where they do not need this certification from the police or the county attorney or whatever. They can apply without that, just showing that, proving in some way, and usually it's from their own statement that they're a victim of trafficking. And real quick, when I was in DC working with Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, CARE Coalition, you may or may not have heard of them, they do completely detention. They go into immigration detention jails in Virginia and Maryland and give Know Your Rights presentations and try and seek out potential clients. Anyways, when I was working with them and went into a jail in Farmville, Virginia, we came across a young woman from Mexico who was trafficked here and unfortunately was in jail. And her story, tragic, like everybody's that is found in this net, but in her smaller town in Mexico, somebody had come from the U.S., a Mexican-born person who had been living in the U.S. came, fell in love with her, gave her all these gifts. I mean, very much made her think that she was the only woman for him. And he said, "Oh, you have to come with me to the U.S. We're going to have our life together." And then when he brought her here, she was promptly a sex slave, his sex slave. And in the D.C. area, she was violated time and time and time again. And so I worked on that case. This is the only T visa case that I've worked on, which I'll mention in a moment why that is. But as part of the U visa and the VAWA and the T visa, each victim gives their statement, tells their story of abuse. And it's often pages and pages and pages of horrible things. And so I think I don't need to go into all the specifics. I think you've heard these stories before. You can imagine them. But I think it makes, these stories make me really question sometimes what world do I live in, right? Where this can happen, where this evil is seems like so pervasive. But to see the benefits that can come with protection in the U.S., with this, you're authorized to be here, you can work. It's a really weird thing, right? You're a victim of a horrible crime of either, rape or abuse or what have you, but you can have a work permit and stay. I mean, it's weird, right? Because it's a silver lining of a really rough story, but I am thankful that, at the end of some of their stories, they at least have the ability to build a life here without fear and away from their abuse. I would just mention, as we go into our trafficking hour here, the T visa, I told you with the U visa, they give $10,000 a year. The T, $5,000 are available, which sounds right, why less? Well, since they've been keeping track of the numbers, I'll give a couple numbers here. In 2005, only 379 applied. 2009, the number's up to 475. And the last available number, 2012, only 885 trafficking victims, immigrant victims, applied for this. And so that's why I've only worked on one. These people are hidden. We don't really know about them, as you may know. And so I am convinced that there are way more than the 5,000 that the government would give out each year of immigrant victims of trafficking that could apply for this. So as you go out in your communities, or as you become more aware of trafficking in Iowa, I would just encourage you to help spread awareness of this program, and if you ever hear of somebody that might qualify, please refer them to me, because my position is meant specifically for these types of cases. So I'm going to put my card in the back too, with my work cell and my email. So I would love to see more people access these benefits that are available to them. Okay, ya, which means enough in Spanish. Ya me voy. So thank you for your time today, and thanks for everything that you're doing today.